So today's conversation is a personal one. As I look back at the last season of my life, there are some things that I have gone through that I haven't really taken the time to fully process. So about 2 years ago now, I got a divorce, and it was a really hard time for me as I struggled with the idea of divorce and what it meant to me and my faith. And so I want to discuss it here today with all of you. And I want to discuss that topic and how does divorce impact our faith, and does it have an impact beyond just ourselves? So that's the conversation I want to have today. And with me today to have that conversation, I've got two very important guests. I've got Dr. Joy back with us another time, and Brandon Curry. So if you've tuned in previously to other episodes, you may have met Dr. Joy as our resident presiding elder from the AME Church, but she is also a family woman. And Brandon is active in the local AME Church as well, and he is a father of two gorgeous girls. So welcome to our show today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I just want to start off with the question of, what was your experience with divorce, or what has your experience with divorce been? So that way we can get an understanding of where we're all coming from in this conversation. And I'll start with you, Dr. Joy.
Wow. So this is Faith and Fire. So there's total honesty on this show.
Honesty circle.
So my first thought was, which one?
That's fair.
No, I have been around this road several times, and each time was different. It was a different learning. But my faith has gotten stronger as a result of each one, if you can understand that. And hopefully we'll unpack that today.
For sure.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And Brandon, what has been your experience with divorce?
Mine was more shock than anything. It was something that happened abruptly and something that you can never prepare for. And with you not being prepared for it, you just kind of go with the flow with it. So it was one of those things where I just kind of just accepted it. And then from the moment of acceptance, I just had to find a way to deal with it daily.
Wow. Just had to find a way to deal with it daily. That's really sticking with me. And I definitely resonate with that, with my experience. And mine's not as recent. Yours was pretty recent, correct?
Mine was 5 months ago.
5 months ago?
Yes.
Yeah, so really recent. And even 2 years ago, I still kind of brings me back to that moment of, you do kind of deal with it moment by moment. And I think how you feel about it, or at least how I felt about it in each moment, was a little different. And in processing that. And I see you nodding your head, Dr.
Yes.
Joy. Same for you?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, wow. Okay. So I'm already excited about our conversation today. So a big question that I want to understand and dive into, and Brandon, I would love for you to start, is how did getting a divorce impact your faith?
My faith in God, it hasn't impacted at all.
Mm-hmm.
However, it's impacted my faith with people, because God never changes, whereas people do. And we change our minds daily about everything. And just the way that we view marriage in today's society, it can come and go as a regular relationship. Whereas I still believe in everything that God has implemented in the way that a marriage should be. It's just we don't view it that same way anymore.
Wow. Your faith in God, it stayed the same, but your faith in people was really shaken.
Yes.
And that is so big. And we were talking in the episode as we were looking at church and whether you need to go to church to have a healthy spiritual life. And I think one of the big things that came up was the importance of community. And so that's what resonates with me when you talk about your faith in people, is how does that impact our ability to have that connection, to have that community, which then in turn creates that connection to God. And how have you seen that show up in terms of, is it specific people, or is it in general your faith in people? Has that impacted your relationship to community?
It's just like with any other conversation. It just depends on who you talk to. You can talk to a certain person about finance. You can talk to a certain person about relationships, cars, sports, same thing. Same thing with faith. Everyone brings a certain element to the conversation, and you just have to realize who are you getting your information from in order to absorb it and for it to remain.
Yeah.
With that being said, you really have to focus on who you share your information with, because you can just share it with anyone and you will get anything that will come out of their mouth. Whereas you still have to have the same conversation with like-minded people in order to get the information that you need to hear.
Wow. So it's almost like your discernment meter gets turned up.
Yes.
Wow. So almost in a way, I feel like a discernment in my mind is just so closely related to my faith. And so when you talk about your discernment going up, it's almost like you need even more faith and more reliance on God to really tell you who are these people that are in my life and why are they in my life and what purpose do you have for them in my life, so that I do not call on them outside of their appointment.
Correct. Yes.
That's awesome. Thank you. Dr. Joy, I'd love to hear your perspective on the question.
That's a very good way of putting what you just said. And interestingly enough, my experience, or it impacted me a little differently, whereas my faith in God did not waver. And a little bit, but I can talk about that. And my faith in people wasn't necessarily impacted, except what they said. But it was really my faith in myself that took the hit.
How so?
Because I'm usually pretty confident about, at least I like to think I'm pretty confident about my decisions. And my decisions in the area of relationships have not been on point at all. I like to tell God that my picker is off. And so I refuse to pick, if you will, another one for myself. And I yielded all of that to God, because it was about me and my choices and what did I do. So I internalized it more about me not seeing things or overlooking things. And what was it about me? Even though in the situations, I was the one that initiated the break.
Wow. I'm having deja vu right now. I feel like I'm talking to myself in a mirror, because you're using literally the same words that I had within myself as I was going through that journey. My picker is off. It's 100%, right? I made it a lot about me. I made it mean something about me and my ability to find a suitable mate. I did not initiate the break, but in the same situation, I still blamed myself for not picking well, for not choosing the right mate. Mm-hmm. And so I can definitely resonate with that in terms of shaking your faith. It shook my faith in me.
Absolutely.
And the choices that I make, the decisions that I make. I mean, and I see that show up in dating too. Am I going to pick well? Am I treating this like an interview, as they say? Or am I being too gracious? Because I'm very generous with people. I am very trusting and very forgiving, and I refuse to let that go. But how do I find that balance?
I don't think you have to let that go. I think you would do yourself a disservice if you let it go. But it goes back to then what we were talking about, your discernment. You really have to turn up your discernment meter, and that comes from your faith.
So it's really about that discernment, right?
Yes. And the discernment is really about your faith. Like, do you trust God? Do you trust the information you're getting that comes from God, from your faith? And if you do, then your discernment is level is raised. So I asked God, I said, because I am trusting and I give a lot, I tend to put myself last. So I said, God, I don't want to be deceived anymore. I don't want to be deceived by people appearing one way and then presenting one way and then really being another way. Mm-hmm. I don't want to be deceived. I need my discernment around people to be at its highest level. But that didn't come until much later.
Yeah.
Much later in life, and after a couple times, So like I said, each time was a different lesson. But the discernment piece is really key, because your spirit will tell you this one can't handle that information, right? Or this one you'll connect with, and you need to share with them because they're going through.
Wow. Mm-hmm. I like that last piece of you need to share with them because they're going through. Mm-hmm. And I cannot better articulate the impetus behind this whole show other than you need to share with them because they're going through. And I mean, having these vulnerable conversations just out in the open, the reason it's so important is because you need to share with them because they're going through and they need to hear that story and how it impacted your faith or didn't impact your faith. And this is me talking to myself right now, right? And there are people out there with the same questions as you and may not be asking them and need to hear the answers. Not that there's a right answer or a wrong answer, right?
Yeah.
But they need to hear an answer. They need to process what they're going through too.
And they need to know it's okay to ask.
Ooh.
You know, sometimes we keep stuff in and we hold it in and thinking we can process it. We're processing it with the same information, right?
Facts.
Right. So but we don't think it's okay to ask, what are they going to think of me? What is this going to happen? You know, but I'm this, I'm that, it's not supposed to happen to me. All those, all that noise that's in our head that keeps us from having the breakthroughs that we need to understand the lesson in that.
I found myself talking to different people about it just so I wouldn't suffer in silence. And when you suffer in silence, you're really only damaging yourself. And so by me opening up and letting a few people know, it was an easy release. And then the more I talked about the things that I didn't want to talk about, it became that much easier. And you realize that other people, even if they didn't go through it, they still understood. And they're watching you not to see what you're going to do or anything like that. They just want to make sure you're okay. And out of their concern, you feel a sense of relief because you already know that I have someone to go to. And with the many people that you choose to share the information with, it gets easier every single day. And it just becomes a release of so much information because you're holding it all in. And by you letting it out, it just makes you feel that much better in the long run.
Wow. And I got to have some conversations with you as you were going through your journey. And I really appreciated your approach to being open, to being willing to have the conversation. I'll admit that I was not. So I really didn't share with anyone until it was complete. The paperwork is signed. I was literally watching the requisite 2 months, 3 months, whatever it was to make sure it was official before I started telling folks. And even then I told a couple people who I knew would spread the word and let them tell everyone so that I didn't have to have that conversation. And if I'm really honest, it's because of that last part of people checking on me. And it's from an amazing place, but I just couldn't fathom the idea of having to repeat the story 4, 5, 6, 25 times because people who genuinely care about me just want to know, but I hadn't processed it myself.
That's fair.
It is a long process and everybody processes things differently. And for me, it was day by day. Okay, this is happening now. Okay, this happened. Oh, is this supposed to happen? And you keep questioning everything. And by you bringing it to other people's attention, you get the third eye looking in on your situation and it lets you know that this is supposed to happen. You're doing just fine. And by you reacting or not reacting a certain way, it lets you get a breath of fresh air knowing that, hey, at least I'm doing the right thing.
That's the other side of the coin, right? Is I think that we all assume that we're going to have this conversation and someone's going to be like, oh, what? I'm floored. I had no idea you had issues and I'm shocked and I blame you, you know? Yeah. But that's usually not the reaction, not at all. I remember when I first talked to somebody and let them know I was getting divorced, they were like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And I was like, what? Like, you were always making excuses for him. I was like, you didn't believe me? I was so good at it. So I think just the fact that it wasn't a surprise, was my biggest surprise. And then number 2, just the level of just support, like, okay, like, where do we go from here? And it wasn't a big thing. And I think that was one of my biggest fears initially was like, I'm going to have this conversation and it's going to be big. It's going to be a big conversation and we will talk about it and it'll be significant and we might cry. And none of that was the case whatsoever.
By the third time you have the conversation is as easy as talking about the weather.
You're like, oh, by the way, I got divorced.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just a thing. It's a thing that you know about me now.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that you thought just a build up to having it. What are they going to say? Okay, I'm going to do it this time. And they're like, yeah, okay. And the reality is people see you out of character.
Yeah.
People that love you, that know you, they see you out of character. What I used to get all the time was, where's that spark? Your spark is gone. What's going on? Oh, nothing. And I was trying to find a way to regain my joy and my peace in the midst of what I knew I would be going through.
Yeah. So we're touching a little bit about how our communities reacted, right? Or the people around us reacted when they found out about our divorce. Dr. Joy, I would love to hear from you because you were in a very public position when you went through your last divorce.
Yes.
And you were the head of a church.
Yes.
What was that like?
So it took 2 years of me wondering. I knew 2 years before I did it that it needed to be done. But I kept saying, but I'm a pastor. But, what is the church going to say? What does this mean about me and being able to pastor? I had to process all of that until I realized that I either am fake in the house or I'm fake in public.
Ooh.
And because I had already gone on this road to being authentic, it was no longer okay. So I had to be my authentic self. And that meant leaving that relationship and accepting that what people see and say is based upon their own filters.
Yeah.
Their own filters about what they think marriage means, what they think divorce means, what they think about a pastor in terms of can do no wrong. Newsflash, life happens to us too. What they think about. And then you have to give them the opportunity to process as well. I think the biggest thing for me going through that was that it helped the congregation see, well, some of them, that you can right size your relationship and it's okay. That doesn't mean that either one of you are bad people. You're just not good together.
Yeah. That it doesn't have to mean more than it means.
And you don't have to choose sides.
I mean, that's a good point that you bring up about choosing sides. Whether you're the pastor of the church or whether you're just a congregate, there's always that element, right?
Yeah.
Brandon, I know you're active in your church. Have you seen any of that in your church community or your just regular community in terms of people feeling the needs to choose sides?
Usually there's going to be sides that people want to choose, whether they do it or not openly is a big difference because there are times where you're friends with both people and it's hard to make that decision when they break up. It's kind of one of those, who did I get along with more? Who did I talk to more? And it makes you kind of have this feeling of, I need to pick a side, but I got to make sure I pick the right one. And there's no right or wrong choice. You just have a bond with both people and you just need to make sure that you're open with what you're doing and that there's no secret, alliance or anything behind it.
No secret dinner parties where you invite both people and try to parent trap them back together. Things like that.
I call those unholy alliances.
Unholy alliances. I love it.
Anti-faith alliances.
How about you, Dr. Joy? Did you see that in the church? Was there a divide? Was there a split?
Oh, my goodness. Yes. And so what we said in front of the congregation, we both went in front of the congregation and kind of told them what we were doing. And some were like, but others didn't know what to do. And we really tried to make it where they didn't have to choose. But like Brandon was saying, they're going to choose anyway. And I said, at the end of the day, some of you like him, whether you like me anyway. And it's okay. Mm-hmm. So, but don't make this, you don't have to get into this fight, right? There is no fight here. There's no side to choose. And so if you do, you need to examine why you're doing that.
That's key, right? Like just because you may be closer to one person than you are the other, right? So there may be a genuine friendship on one side, whereas the other one, it was like, you were the plus one. I didn't know who they were going to bring.
That is correct. I got that a lot.
You got that a lot.
As I talked to a few people, it's like, well, I talked to you more anyway. And every time I came over, you were the one that, did this and that. So, Some people were more drawn to me as it was, but again, I didn't make them make a decision. They did that on
Right.
their own. And it's just sometimes you don't see things through the other people's eyes because you are not them until they tell you what they saw.
Right. And I think that there's a difference between what you're describing, where someone chooses to maybe continue to develop a relationship more significantly with one person than the other, versus I think what I heard you describe, which is getting in the fight. I think one of the biggest things that I love about my church family, and I wish we could work on as a church family, is y'all family, but you're not family. Like, you don't need to be in every detail. And I think that's the hardest thing about going through something like this in a church community, is that everyone feels entitled to your life and every aspect of your life and every detail of your life. And what did he say? What did he do? And sometimes it's not our place to have that conversation even. Sometimes it's not our place to ask, well, what happened? Did he cheat? Sometimes it's just our place to be supportive and to be that friend, as opposed to getting in the fight and taking sides, or, well, what did he do? Well, what did she do? I think there's a difference in there, and there's a line that I think one is supportive and the other one is contributing to almost bringing down of the community, because it hurts everyone when that happens.
It does. I remember a conversation and someone wanted to know details. I said, let me ask you something. How is knowing that going to change anything? Mm-hmm. Is that going to undivorce me? No. Are you going to unfriend me? Well, no, that's not what I'm saying. So how is that information even relevant to you at this moment?
Yeah.
I've processed it.
Add it to the list of things you don't need to know about people's private lives.
Right. When I was doing weddings, and that was another impact, is people, how are you going to do marriage counseling and you got divorced? I can really tell them what not to do. Or I can guide you on the conversations you need to have for sure, so you can help understand what your non-negotiables are. But aside from that, the wedding piece, I like to tell them that everybody that's gathered there in the community that's invited to a wedding, they're inviting you to walk alongside of them. They're inviting you into their life, not to take over their life.
Into their lives, not to take over their lives. Mm-hmm. Can we preach that at the next sermon? I love it. So let's go past the divorce. We talk about the impact to the community. Now I want to talk a little bit about that healing process. What did it take for you, Dr. Joy, to heal after your divorce? And was there a particular one that had a little bit more of a oomph to it and really had a healing process?
Well, I would say this last one, because it was also the longest time that I was married, but it still ended in a course correction is what I called it. Okay. Maybe I decided that was the word because that felt gentler, but it was a course correction. And the healing actually started when I said I really wanted to be authentic with myself and with others. And I realized I was not being authentic with my mate at the time. And so processing that in my head for 2 years helped with the healing. And so when it came time to make the announcement, if you will, my prayer was just, God, let me have grace with this. Like, it's a course correction that I know we need, but he may not feel the same way. So let me do it with grace. And let me do it in a way that is not threatening, doesn't embarrass him or anything like that. Now, I can't say that same thing went the other way, but it's okay. I'm only responsible for my behavior. And so I'm clear that through that whole process, I was intentional about leaving him whole as I could possibly leave him, as it was in my power. And then and that helped me heal because I knew that my intention was not to harm.
Yeah. It's interesting. I really want to key into something that you said. It's like your intention was to leave him whole and not to harm him. And you're only responsible for what you do. And I do have other friends that are going through divorce right now. And it's not something that I wish anybody follow my path on.
Right.
But one of the biggest conversations I'm having with them is you're responsible for what you do. You end up in divorce getting into very emotionally charged situations, conversations, etc. And one of the things that I talk about is, yes, you're emotionally charged. It hurts what they did, or you may feel justified to take some action. But at the end of the day, it's so important that you are responsible and accountable for how you respond, how you show up in this, even your divorce. And at the end of the day, you're the only one who will be held accountable for the actions that you take. And they're not going to be like, well, what did he do, girl? They're not going to do that. They're not going to say it to you either.
Right.
They're going to sit there and they're going to say, okay, well, how did you behave? And oftentimes people don't see what initiated it. They see that snappy post you put on Instagram after.
Ooh, that's another whole podcast.
Yes, divorces don't belong on social media. That is the spoiler alert for the podcast she just seeded. Divorces and other things, those are private situations. They don't belong on social media. And back to our message. So Brandon, how about you? What did that healing process look like for you?
Still going through it. The divorce is, so everybody's divorce is under different circumstances, on different terms. And I can only speak from mine for right now. And there were so many different directions that it went that I just had to buckle up and just take the ride. And that's the best way I could describe it. And through it all, I just had to look back and remind myself that I did everything that I knew how to do at the appropriate time when I was supposed to do it. Anything outside of that, I have no control over, had no control over, so that I couldn't worry about. And from there, going through the divorce itself, I only had control over the way I responded and reacted to certain things. Everything else I had no control over. So the one thing that I did have control over was the way I responded, and that was the only thing I needed to make sure that I kept in check. From there, everything else was a surprise because I felt that everything was changing every other week, and I just had to be prepared for it. And again, went back to my network of people who I trusted and just said, hey, this is what I'm going through. This is what this looks like. Not that you can probably tell me what you're feeling or anything, because I know you haven't gone through it, but this is what I'm going through. So just want to get this out just so I know that I'm still, doing what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah. In a divorce full of surprises, I can imagine having that community was critical to process, because it's not just one's processing, it's processing every time you get a surprise.
Yes, it was things changing constantly. There was no set way of adjusting to anything because it was always changing. And then I had to go with those changes, whether I wanted to or not. And it was a lot of surprises that you didn't want, and you just had to go with the flow.
It's one of the hardest parts about divorce. You have a person that's somewhat still very connected to you, making decisions that you have no say in anymore. And it's going to impact you in a very real way, especially if you have kids.
Yes, that was the hardest part, having kids involved with it. If kids weren't involved with it, it'd be so easy to let go, walk away, and not look back. But everything that affects me directly is because kids are involved. If my kids weren't involved, it wouldn't bother me as much. That's what I think about constantly, is like, how does this affect them? What do I need to do to make sure it doesn't, hurt them in the long run? And I just got to take those precautions and to make sure that they are the forefront of my mind. So I make sure that I'm always looking out for their best interest. And again, they're in it, and I don't know exactly what they're going through. I can only imagine. So it's just the constant communication, constant looking after them, and just making sure that I am doing what I think is best for them in this situation.
That's fair. That's all you can do. Wow. So this is big. I feel like even just in this conversation, there's been some beautiful healing and processing of things. I'll speak to it myself. My healing journey, I was on it, but it didn't become clear what it was until I was done. it was interesting because there were 3 lessons I had to learn. And I didn't know this until I got to the end of the 3rd lesson. And then it was like all dropped in my spirit. It was just so clear. And I was left with 3 lessons, and I knew where I learned them all at once. I knew, like, I looked back and I was like, oh, there they are, A, B, and C. And I actually set my Alexa, sorry if I just set off your whole house, to tell me and remind me every day of those 3 lessons, because what I got at the end of that journey was, if you don't do these 3 things or remember these 3 things and apply them to your life, you cannot have what I have for you. So I think that's the thing that I take away from this, is there's something out there for me. Otherwise, I wouldn't have to learn those 3 lessons. I could just keep making mistakes. There's something out there for me. I don't know if it's a person, place, or thing, but something is out there for me, and I need to do all of those 3 things in order to achieve it. So that was really my healing journey and what I was left with. And to that end, I would love for us to plant some seeds and leave some healing words for someone who is going through this today, because we know that it's 50 or higher % of divorces marriages that end in divorce these days. So it's definitely a pervasive issue. And there's a lot of people struggling with this. And I love that it didn't have a negative impact on any of our faith, but I've seen it have a really real impact on people's faith or their ability to even focus on their faith, because they're dealing with things coming from everywhere. So what can we leave those people with as we wrap up this conversation? Dr. Joy?
I would say that we have to remember that they're not bad people necessarily. You have to separate that. A divorce doesn't mean that God doesn't love you anymore, or that you have fallen out of the will of God. Yeah. That's what people say too. That's not what that means. Your relationship with God, your faith in God will dictate how you process and how you heal, and what lessons you take into the next relationship, if there is one. I would say trust the God's talk inside of yourself. The closer you are to being authentic, the better you can hear what the Spirit is saying to you.
Wow.
And that's my belief, and that's what has helped me. And there are times I'm still healing, right? When because my intention was, again, do no harm, and I wanted to make sure he was okay. But I think I kind of maybe have went overboard with that initially, so much so that my attorney said, I'm going to need you to stop. So
you got to listen to your attorney now.
I know. And I was like, what? You're doing too much. But again, my intention, and I'm so glad that I did it the way I did it, because I could sleep at night. Mm-hmm. I know he was set up well, and I know that he still had another chance. I just wasn't there. I just wasn't in his life. And so my faith has blossomed, because I see the goodness of God even in the really, really sticky, mucky stuff. Mm-hmm. That I'm still his child, and he still favors me, and I still get blessings, and I still get when I walk in the path that God lays out for me, the blessings come. My current husband is a result of that. And I'm grateful.
It's beautiful.
Yes, I'm married again.
Yes, you are happily married. Brandon?
Well, it goes back to the strong faith in God. And once you have that, you go to realize at the beginning of any marriage, for that matter, you get joined underneath God. And throughout the marriage itself, you just have to realize that you are doing everything that you can to keep the marriage strong. But then it goes back to us being human and us changing our mind and it running its course. Not that it should, but it happens because, he's given us the ability to make those decisions. And sometimes those decisions are what gets us in trouble or gets us to look at things slightly different once we keep going in that same route, that same path. I feel that regardless of what leads up to a divorce, it doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. It just ran its course. And it goes back to what I said earlier with people changing their mind and the way that society looks at marriage now. Is just that's just the world we're living in now, to where, some marriages don't survive the forever period that it's supposed to, genuinely, in what God designed it for.
Yeah. I feel like that's a whole nother episode right there, is marriage and that bond of marriage that you're talking about. Wow.
If I may, I really want to say it's how you go into. I don't think anybody goes into a marriage thinking, oh, okay, I'm going to give this a couple of years, and then, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. There may be, but I think by and large, we go in with the intention that this is the person, and here's the key, that we chose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I'm speaking for myself, when I choose, I don't choose well for me, but when I let God choose, and send the one,
yes,
it may not look like I thought it was going to look. He may not, not a it. It may, but he's perfectly put together for me, and where God is taking me, and that has been the most amazing aha that has come out of this, when I totally gave in to God and say, if you don't, I'm okay with that too.
Yeah. Okay, that's beautiful. And what a wonderful way to kind of wrap up this conversation, right? We go from the beginning of the conversation where we talk about that impact and how it feels, and looking for that community and the impact on us and the impact on others. And then we bring it home in full circle as healing. And then that path forward of letting God choose, leaving it up to God. And if you haven't gotten to that situation yet where you are married, making sure that God is in the driver's seat in terms of choosing. Really, what I'm really taking away from this conversation is that it's not necessarily that divorce has to break your faith at all. It's quite the opposite. Is when you're going through something like a divorce, it takes almost twice the faith, double the measure of faith, in the discernment, and making sure that you're trusting the right people as you go through this process, and that you're reevaluating. It takes the authenticity, looking at who you are and making sure that it's in alignment with what's going on in your life, and maybe even looking at, did I make this choice, or did I let God help me make this choice? So what I hear is hope. A lot of hope in this conversation. Hope for healing, hope for future love, and just hope that if we stay close and by God's side, that we can take these moments and turn them into something truly special for us going into the future.
Yes.
So I want to thank both of you for being here today and discussing this with me. And if you like this kind of content, make sure that you subscribe and like, so that you can stay tuned for future episodes as we dive into more topics like this from an authentic perspective. Look forward to seeing you next.